Richard Templeton, a man whose name echoed through the corridors of wealth and power, was not accustomed to surprises. His life, a carefully constructed mosaic of luxury and control, left little room for the unexpected. Yet, as he stepped out of his sleek black limousine into the bustling streets of Manhattan, something caught his eye: a figure huddled in the shadows, just beyond the gleaming entrance of his five-star hotel. The rain was relentless that evening, pouring down in thick sheets that blurred the city's neon lights into a kaleidoscope of colors. Richard paused, his hand hovering over the door handle as he noticed the young woman sitting on the cold, wet pavement. She was shivering, her thin coat soaked through, offering little protection against the biting wind. There was something about her, a certain fragility, that tugged at something deep inside him, something he had long buried. "Sir?" The doorman's voice broke through his thoughts, but Richard waved him off, his gaze still fixed on the girl. She looked up as he approached, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and exhaustion. They were strikingly blue, those eyes, like a calm sea under a stormy sky. For a moment, Richard was taken aback, struck by how young she seemed, and how utterly out of place she looked against the backdrop of the opulent hotel. "What are you doing out here in this weather?" he asked, his voice softer than he intended. The girl blinked, startled by his attention. I'm just trying to find somewhere to stay dry," she stammered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. "I'll leave if you want me to." Richard hesitated. He wasn't a man who typically involved himself in the affairs of strangers, let alone those who lingered outside his property. But something about her, maybe it was the way she looked at him, or perhaps it was the fleeting memory of someone he once loved, made him pause. "Come inside," he said, surprising even himself with the offer. The girl's eyes widened in disbelief. I can't. I don't have any money." Richard shook his head. "That doesn't matter. You'll catch your death out here. Come, at least get warm." Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked toward the hotel entrance, half expecting her not to follow. But after a moment of hesitation, he heard the soft shuffle of footsteps behind him. Inside, the lobby was a world away from the storm raging outside. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over marble floors, and the air was filled with the scent of fresh flowers and expensive perfume. Guests milled about in evening wear, oblivious to the world beyond the glass doors. Richard led the girl to a quiet corner, where a plush chair awaited. "Sit," he instructed, and she sank into the chair with a sigh of relief, her body trembling from the cold. A staff member appeared almost instantly, offering a thick blanket and a cup of hot tea. The girl accepted them with shaking hands, mumbling her thanks. Richard watched her closely, his mind racing with questions he wasn't sure he wanted answered. Who was she? Why was she out there alone? And why did he feel this inexplicable urge to help her? "What's your name?" he asked finally, breaking the silence. "Lily," she replied, her voice soft, but more steady now. "Lily Morgan." "Lily," Richard repeated, the name rolling off his tongue as if it held some hidden significance. "You have no place to stay?" She shook her head, her eyes downcast. "No, I lost my job and I couldn't pay rent. I've been trying to get by, but it's been hard." Richard felt a pang of something he hadn't felt in years: compassion, empathy, perhaps even guilt. He couldn't ignore the fact that while he lived in unimaginable comfort, people like Lily were struggling just to survive. He stood up, making a quick decision. "You'll stay here tonight. We'll find you a room." Lily looked up at him, her eyes brimming with tears. "I can't let you do that. It's too much." "Nonsense," Richard replied firmly. "It's just for one night. We'll figure things out in the morning." Before she could protest further, he signaled to the concierge, who nodded and moved to make the arrangements. Richard turned back to Lily, offering her a small, reassuring smile. "You're safe here," he said quietly. Lily didn't respond, but the look in her eyes said it all: relief, gratitude, and perhaps just a glimmer of hope. As he walked away, Richard couldn't help but feel a strange sense of purpose. This small act of kindness had stirred something within him, something he thought had died long ago with the woman he loved. Little did he know, This chance encounter would set off a chain of events that would change both their lives forever. The next morning, Richard found himself drawn back to the hotel earlier than usual. He couldn't explain it, but something about the young woman he had helped the night before lingered in his mind. As he entered the grand lobby, his eyes instinctively searched for any sign of her. He found Lily seated by one of the tall windows, wrapped in the same blanket from the night before. The morning light streamed in, casting a soft glow on her face. She looked different now, cleaner, more composed, but there was still a fragility to her that tugged at his heart. "Good morning," Richard greeted, startling her from her thoughts. Lily looked up, a shy smile tugging at her lips. "Good morning," she replied, her voice still soft but warmer than it had been the night before. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, pulling out a chair to sit across from her. Lily nodded, a hint of color rising to her cheeks. "Yes, thank you. I can't remember the last time I slept in a bed like that." Richard hesitated for a moment, then leaned forward slightly. "Lily, I need to ask, how did you end up here? In this situation?" She looked down at her hands, fiddling with the edge of the blanket. "It's a long story," she began, her voice tinged with the weight of her memories. "I came to the city hoping for a better life. I had dreams of becoming a singer, but things didn't go as planned. I lost my job, and with it, my apartment. It all happened so fast. One day I was okay, and the next, I had nothing." Richard listened intently, noticing the way her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. There was pain in her words, but also a quiet resilience that impressed him. "And the singing?" he asked gently. "Do you still sing?" A small, wistful smile crossed her face. "Not like I used to. I sing sometimes, just to myself. It's the only thing that keeps me going." Richard felt a sudden pang of familiarity, as if her story was echoing something buried deep within him. He leaned back in his chair, staring out the window at the bustling city below. "My wife," he began slowly, "used to sing. She had a voice that could stop time, make everything else fade away. But she passed away many years ago." Lily's eyes softened with understanding. "I'm sorry," she whispered, sensing the depth of his loss. "She used to sing to our daughter even before she was born," Richard continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "But she never got the chance to hold her. Emma died during childbirth, and our daughter, well, she didn't survive either." There was a long silence between them, the weight of shared grief filling the space. For Richard, these memories were like shards of glass, painful and sharp. Yet he found himself opening up to Lily in a way he hadn't with anyone else. Perhaps it was her gentleness, or the way she listened without judgment, that made him feel he could share this part of himself. "I'm sorry," Lily said again, her voice steady despite the tears glistening in her eyes. "It sounds like she was a remarkable woman." "She was," Richard agreed, his voice thick with emotion. "And sometimes, when I hear certain songs, it's like she's still here, singing to me." Lily hesitated for a moment before speaking. Would you like to hear a song? It's something my mother used to sing to me when I was a child. It's one of the few things I have left of her." Richard nodded, unable to find the words. Lily took a deep breath, then began to sing softly, her voice filling the quiet morning air. It was a haunting melody, one that seemed to weave its way through the room, wrapping around Richard like a comforting embrace. As she sang, Richard felt a rush of memories flood back. Emma's laughter, the way she used to sing to their unborn child, and the overwhelming love he had felt for both of them. Tears welled up in his eyes, and for the first time in years, he didn't try to hold them back. When Lily finished, the room was silent, save for the distant hum of the city outside. Richard looked at her, his vision blurred with tears. "That was beautiful," he whispered. "Thank you." Lily smiled, a small, sad smile that spoke of understanding and shared sorrow. "Thank you for giving me a chance," she replied softly. "Not just to sing, but to be heard." In that moment, Richard realized that this young woman, who had stumbled into his life by chance, had touched something deep within him, a part of him he thought he had lost forever. And as they sat there, in the quiet of the morning, Richard knew that his life was about to change in ways he could never have anticipated. Over the next few days, Richard found himself increasingly preoccupied with thoughts of Lily. He tried to maintain his usual routine: meetings with business partners, phone calls with high-profile clients, and overseeing the daily operations of his vast empire. But no matter what he did, his mind kept drifting back to the young woman he had taken in from the rain. Her voice, that haunting melody she had sung, played over and over in his head, as if it were a key unlocking memories he had long buried. It was on a quiet afternoon, when the hotel was unusually still, that Richard heard it again. He was in his private office on the top floor, reviewing some documents, when the faint sound of singing reached his ears. At first, he thought he was imagining it, a trick of the mind. But as the notes grew clearer, he realized it was real. Lily was singing. He set down his papers, rising from his chair as if in a trance. The sound pulled him, beckoning him to follow. He left his office, walking down the corridor toward the source of the music. It was a lullaby, one he hadn't heard in years, yet every note was etched into his memory. His heart pounded as he reached the door of the suite where Lily was staying. He hesitated for a moment, unsure if he should intrude, but the pull of the music was too strong. He knocked lightly, and when there was no answer, he slowly pushed the door open. Lily was sitting by the window, just as she had been the first morning, but now her eyes were closed, her face peaceful as she sang. The room was bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, casting a warm glow over everything. Richard stood in the doorway, captivated by the scene before him. He didn't dare move, afraid that any sound might break the spell. The song came to an end, and Lily opened her eyes, startled to see Richard standing there. She quickly rose to her feet, a look of apology on her face. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disturb you." "You didn't," Richard interrupted, his voice thick with emotion. "Please don't stop. That song, it was Emma's favorite." Lily's expression softened, and she slowly sat back down, sensing that Richard had more to say. He stepped into the room, moving to the window where he could see the city stretching out below them, the sun dipping low on the horizon. "I haven't heard that song in years," he began, his gaze distant. "Emma used to sing it all the time, especially when she was pregnant. She said it made her feel connected to our daughter, even before she was born. I thought I'd never hear it again." Lily watched him carefully, her heart aching for the man who stood before her, clearly still haunted by the ghosts of his past. "It was my mother's song, too," she said quietly. "She used to sing it to me every night when I was little. I don't remember much about her, but that song, it's always stayed with me." Richard turned to face her, his eyes searching hers as if trying to piece together a puzzle. "Your mother, what was her name?" "Evelyn," Lily replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Evelyn Morgan." The name sent a jolt through Richard, like a spark igniting a long-forgotten memory. He hadn't heard that name in decades, but it was one he could never forget. Evelyn had been Emma's closest friend, almost like a sister to her. They had grown up together, inseparable, until life had taken them down different paths. After Emma's death, Richard had lost touch with everyone from that time, too consumed by his grief to keep any connections alive. "Evelyn," he repeated, the name heavy on his tongue. "She was Emma's best friend." Lily's eyes widened in surprise. "You knew her?" Richard nodded slowly, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of the revelation. "Yes, a long time ago. She was there when Emma and I got married. I didn't know she had a daughter." Lily's brow furrowed in confusion. "She never mentioned you, or Emma. I only know she left home when I was young. I always thought it was because of me." "No," Richard said quickly, stepping closer to her. "It wasn't because of you. Evelyn and Emma, they had a falling out just before Emma passed. I never knew why. Maybe she left to escape the pain, or maybe it was something else. But it was never your fault." Lily's eyes filled with tears, the weight of years of doubt and guilt suddenly lifted from her shoulders. "I've always wondered," she whispered. "I thought if I could just find her, maybe I could understand why she left." Richard felt an overwhelming sense of connection to this girl, who had unknowingly brought back a piece of his lost past. He reached out, taking her hand in his. "I'm sorry for what you've been through, Lily, but I want you to know you're not alone in this. Whatever answers you're looking for, we'll find them together." Tears streamed down Lily's cheeks, But for the first time in a long time, they weren't tears of sorrow. She squeezed Richard's hand, a silent thank you for the kindness and understanding he had shown her. In that moment, both of them knew that their lives had become intertwined in a way neither could have anticipated. What had started as a chance encounter was now unfolding into a journey of healing and discovery, one that would lead them both to confront the past and find the strength to move forward together. The next morning, Richard was already waiting in the lobby when Lily descended the grand staircase. She was dressed in clothes he had arranged for her, a simple, elegant outfit that suited her well. The transformation from the shivering girl he had found outside to the composed young woman before him was remarkable, but what struck him most was the determination in her eyes. They were no longer filled with fear, but with a quiet resolve. "Good morning," she greeted him with a tentative smile, her voice steady. "Good morning, Lily," Richard replied, standing as she approached. "Are you ready?" Lily nodded, though there was a hint of nervousness in her expression. "As ready as I'll ever be." Richard had spent much of the previous night making arrangements. After their conversation, he had contacted some old acquaintances, people who might hold the key to the mysteries surrounding Evelyn. Now, they were set to visit a woman who had been a close friend to both Evelyn and Emma, a woman named Margaret, who had been like a second mother to the two girls. As they drove through the city, Richard noticed the tension in Lily's posture, the way she twisted her hands in her lap. He reached over, gently placing his hand over hers. "Whatever we find out today, remember that you're not alone in this. We'll face it together." Lily looked at him, her eyes softening. "Thank you, Richard. I don't think I could do this without you." The car pulled up to a modest brownstone in a quiet neighborhood, a stark contrast to the glitz and glamour of Richard's world. Margaret's home was warm and inviting, with ivy climbing the walls and a small garden in front. Richard and Lily exchanged a glance before stepping out of the car and approaching the front door. Margaret opened the door almost immediately, as if she had been waiting for them. She was an older woman, her silver hair pulled back into a neat bun, her eyes sharp and curious. But when she saw Richard, those eyes softened with recognition, and a sad smile touched her lips. "Richard Templeton," she said, her voice warm with nostalgia. "It's been years." Richard returned her smile, though it was tinged with sadness. "Too many, Margaret." Margaret's gaze shifted to Lily, and her expression turned thoughtful. "And you must be Lily," she said, as if she already knew who she was. "Come in, both of you. We have a lot to talk about." They followed Margaret into a cozy sitting room, where the smell of freshly brewed tea filled the air. The walls were lined with photographs, each telling a story of a life well lived. Richard's eyes caught a picture of Emma, smiling brightly, her arm around a younger Evelyn. The sight of it made his heart ache with bittersweet memories. Once they were settled, Margaret poured them tea, her movements deliberate and calm, as if she were preparing for a conversation that had been a long time coming. "So, you want to know about Evelyn?" Margaret began, her gaze fixed on Lily. "I knew this day would come eventually." Lily leaned forward, her voice trembling slightly. "Yes, I've spent so many years wondering why she left, why she never came back for me. I need to understand." Margaret sighed, a deep, weary sound, as she set her teacup down. Evelyn was a complicated woman, full of contradictions. She loved you, Lily, never doubt that, but she was also haunted by her past, by things she could never quite let go. Richard watched as Margaret spoke, noting the way Lily's hands trembled slightly as she listened. He wanted to reach out, to comfort her, but he knew this was a journey she had to take on her own, at least for now. "What happened between her and Emma?" Richard asked, breaking the silence that had fallen over the room. "Why did they drift apart?" Margaret's expression grew pained, and she looked away for a moment, gathering her thoughts. "It was over a man," she finally said, her voice heavy with regret. "A man who came between them, someone Evelyn fell in love with. But it was a love that was never meant to be. Emma found out, and she felt betrayed, not because of the man, but because Evelyn had kept it a secret. Their friendship was everything to Emma, and when that trust was broken, so was their bond." Lily's eyes widened, and she leaned forward, her voice barely a whisper. "Who was he?" Margaret hesitated, as if weighing the consequences of revealing the truth. Then, with a deep breath, she said, "His name was Daniel. He was a friend of Richard's, someone who was close to both Emma and Evelyn. But he was married, and when Evelyn realized she couldn't be with him, she left. She couldn't face Emma, couldn't face the life she wanted but couldn't have. So, she ran." Richard's heart clenched at the name. He remembered Daniel, a man who had been a close friend, someone he had trusted. The revelation hit him like a blow, and he saw the shock mirrored in Lily's face. "Why didn't she come back?" Lily asked, her voice breaking with emotion. "Why didn't she come back for me?" Margaret's eyes filled with sadness. She wanted to Lily, but by then, she was too far gone. She was lost in her own guilt and grief, convinced that you would be better off without her. She didn't know how to face the life she had left behind, so she tried to start over. But the past has a way of catching up with you, no matter how far you run. Tears streamed down Lily's face, and she wiped them away with trembling hands. "I just wanted to know why she didn't want me," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I spent so many nights wondering what I did wrong." Margaret reached out, placing a comforting hand on Lily's. "You did nothing wrong, my dear. Evelyn loved you more than anything in this world, but she was a woman who didn't know how to fight her own demons. She made mistakes, but they were hers, not yours." Richard felt a wave of emotion crash over him as he watched Lily grapple with the weight of her mother's past. He knew that no words could take away the pain she was feeling, but he also knew that the truth, as painful as it was the first step toward healing. Lily looked at Margaret, her eyes red from crying but filled with a new sense of determination. "What do I do now?" she asked, her voice small but steady. Margaret smiled sadly. "You live, Lily. You take the love your mother had for you, flawed as it was, and you make something beautiful out of it. Don't let her mistakes define you. You're stronger than that." Richard placed his hand on Lily's shoulder, offering her silent support. "We'll figure it out, Lily. Together." As they left Margaret's home, the sun had begun to set, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange. Richard and Lily walked in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. But as they reached the car, Lily turned to Richard, her expression more at peace than it had been in years. "Thank you, Richard," she said softly, "for everything." He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. "You don't have to thank me, Lily. We're in this together." As they drove back to the hotel, the city lights began to twinkle in the twilight, and for the first time in a long time, Richard felt a sense of hope. The past was painful, full of loss and regret, but he knew that with Lily by his side, there was a chance for both of them to heal and to find a future where they could finally let go of the ghosts that had haunted them for so long. The drive back to the hotel was quiet. Both Richard and Lily lost in the whirlwind of emotions stirred up by their visit to Margaret. The city passed by in a blur of lights and shadows, the weight of the revelation still heavy on their minds. But amidst the turmoil, there was a sense of clarity, a path forward, albeit one paved with the painful truths of the past. When they finally arrived, Richard suggested they go up to his private lounge, a quiet, secluded space where they could talk without interruption. As they sat across from each other, the city spread out beneath them. Richard poured them both a glass of wine. He handed one to Lily, who accepted it with a shaky hand. "I know this is a lot to take in," Richard began, his voice gentle. "But I want you to know that you don't have to go through this alone. Whatever you need, I'm here for you." Lily took a sip of her wine, her eyes distant as she processed everything they had learned. It's all so overwhelming," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I spent my whole life wondering why my mother left, thinking it was because of me, and now I find out it had nothing to do with me, and everything to do with a man she couldn't be with. It's just so much to take in." Richard nodded, understanding her turmoil all too well. "I know how it feels to carry that kind of weight," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "When Emma died, I blamed myself for a long time. I thought that if I had done something differently, maybe things would have turned out another way. But life doesn't work like that. We make our choices and we live with the consequences, even if they're not what we expected." Lily looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of sadness and gratitude. It must have been so hard for you, losing her like that. I can't even imagine. It was, Richard admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. It nearly destroyed me. But then I met you, and you've brought something back into my life that I thought was gone forever. Hope. Lily's eyes filled with tears, and she set down her glass, unable to hold back the emotion any longer. I felt so lost for so long, she whispered, her voice trembling. But being here, with you, it's like I've finally found a piece of myself that I didn't even know was missing. Richard reached out, taking her hand in his. You're not lost, Lily. You've just been searching for the right path. And now, I think we've found it. Lily squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his presence. Thank you, Richard, she said, her voice filled with emotion. I don't know how I would have faced all of this without you. You don't have to, Richard replied firmly. We're in this together now. The silence that followed was filled with unspoken understanding, a bond that had formed between them through shared pain and the search for healing. It was a connection that neither of them had expected, but one that had become an undeniable part of their lives. After a while, Lily broke the silence. Margaret mentioned something about my mother's guilt and grief. Do you think she ever forgave herself? Richard sighed, a deep, heavy sound. I don't know, he admitted. But I do know that forgiveness is a difficult thing to find, especially when it's yourself you need to forgive. But maybe that's something we can help each other with. Lily nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I'd like that, she whispered. They sat in silence for a while longer, watching as the city lights flickered on one by one, illuminating the darkness. It was a comforting sight, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always a light to guide the way. Finally, Richard stood, offering his hand to Lily. Come on, he said softly. There's something I want to show you. Curious, Lily took his hand, and he led her out onto the balcony. The view from the top of the hotel was breathtaking, the entire city laid out before them like a glittering tapestry. But it wasn't the view that Richard wanted to show her. There's a reason I brought you up here, he said, his voice low and reverent. This was Emma's favorite place. Whenever she needed to clear her head, she'd come up here and just breathe. It was where she felt closest to our daughter, even after she was gone. Lily looked out over the city, feeling a deep connection to the woman she had never met, but who had played such a pivotal role in her life. It's beautiful, she whispered. Richard nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. It is. And now I want you to have this place too. A place where you can feel connected to your mother, where you can find peace. Tears welled up in Lily's eyes as she looked at Richard, overwhelmed by the depth of his kindness. Thank you, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I don't know how to ever repay you for everything you've done for me. You don't have to, Richard replied, his voice gentle. Just knowing that you're finding your way is enough. As they stood together, side by side, the city stretched out before them. Lily felt something shift within her, a sense of closure, but also a new beginning. The past was painful, and the scars it left would never fully heal, but she knew now that she didn't have to face it alone. Richard was there, and together, they would find a way to move forward, one step at a time. For the first time in years, Lily felt like she was finally home. Over the following weeks, Richard and Lily settled into a new rhythm. Their lives intertwined in a way neither had anticipated. Lily began to open up more, sharing stories from her past, her dreams of becoming a singer, and the challenges she had faced along the way. Richard, in turn, shared more about his life with Emma, the love they had shared, and the pain of losing her. Their days were filled with quiet moments of connection, morning walks through the city, evenings spent in the hotel's private lounge, and late-night conversations on the balcony where they found solace in each other's company. It was during one of these evenings, as they watched the city lights flicker below, that Lily hesitantly brought up a topic she had been avoiding. Richard, she began softly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the city. I've been thinking a lot about my mother, about what Margaret told us. And I keep wondering, what if she's still out there? What if she's alive somewhere? Richard turned to face her, his expression thoughtful. He had been thinking about the same thing, but hadn't wanted to push Lily to confront the possibility if she wasn't ready. It's possible, he said carefully. But finding her might not be easy. She left for a reason, and if she's still out there, she might not want to be found. Lily nodded, her gaze distant as she considered his words. I know, she replied, her voice heavy with emotion, but I have to try. I need to know why she left, why she never came back for me. I need to hear it from her. Richard reached out, gently taking her hand in his. Then we'll find her, he said firmly. Whatever it takes, we'll find her. Lily looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. I don't think I could do this without you. You don't have to, Richard replied, his grip on her hand tightening. We're in this together, remember? Over the next few days, Richard began making discreet inquiries, using his extensive network of contacts to track down any leads on Evelyn Morgan. It wasn't easy. Years had passed since she had disappeared, and she had left little trace behind. But Richard was determined, and with Lily's encouragement, he continued to dig deeper. Meanwhile, Lily threw herself into her music, finding solace in the songs that had once been her only source of comfort. She spent hours in the hotel's music room, her voice filling the space with haunting melodies that seemed to echo the emotions she couldn't put into words. Richard often found himself standing outside the door, listening in silence, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride and sorrow. One evening, after a particularly emotional session, Richard knocked on the door of the music room. Lily opened it, her eyes red from crying, but she managed a small smile when she saw him. You're amazing, you know that? Richard said softly, his voice filled with admiration. Lily shook her head, a tear slipping down her cheek. I'm just trying to make sense of everything, she whispered. Music is the only way I know how. Richard stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. You don't have to carry this burden alone, Lily, he said gently. Let me help you. Lily looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and fear. I'm so scared, Richard, she admitted, her voice breaking. What if we find her, and she doesn't want anything to do with me? What if she's moved on, and I'm just a part of her past she wants to forget? Richard took a deep breath, knowing that no matter what he said, there were no guarantees. I can't promise you that everything will be okay, he said honestly, but I can promise that I'll be there with you, every step of the way. And no matter what happens, you'll never have to face it alone. Lily's resolve seemed to strengthen at his words, and she nodded, wiping away her tears. Thank you, she said, her voice steadier now. I don't know what I'd do without you. Richard smiled, a warm, reassuring smile that made her feel safe. You're stronger than you think, Lily, and whatever happens, we'll get through it together. Days turned into weeks as they continued their search, each new lead bringing them closer to the truth. Richard's contacts were able to trace Evelyn's movements to a small town in the Midwest where she had lived under a different name. But just as they thought they were getting close, the trail went cold. Despite the setback, Lily refused to give up. She spent hours poring over old documents, trying to piece together her mother's life from the fragments they had uncovered. Richard was by her side every step of the way, offering support and encouragement when she needed it most. Then, one afternoon, as Lily was going through a stack of old letters they had found, she came across something that made her heart skip a beat. It was a letter, dated a few years after her mother had disappeared, addressed to someone named Margaret, a name that immediately caught Lily's attention. Richard, she called out, her voice trembling with excitement. I think I found something. Richard hurried over, his eyes scanning the letter as Lily held it out to him. It was a brief, cryptic note, but it mentioned a town, Clearwater, and a date that coincided with the time Evelyn had gone off the grid. This could be it, Richard said, his voice filled with hope. This could be the lead we've been looking for. Lily nodded, her heart racing. We have to go there, she said, her voice resolute. I need to find out if she's there, if she's alive. Richard didn't hesitate. Then let's go, he said, determination in his voice. We'll leave first thing in the morning. As they packed for the trip, the air was filled with a sense of anticipation, a mixture of hope and fear that neither of them could shake. The next day, they boarded a plane to Clearwater, the small town where they hoped to finally find the answers they had been searching for. As the plane touched down, Richard glanced at Lily, who was staring out the window, her face a mixture of determination and anxiety. He reached over, gently squeezing her hand. "We're almost there," he said softly. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." Lily turned to him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I'm ready," she whispered, though her voice betrayed the nerves she was trying to suppress. Richard smiled, a reassuring presence beside her. "You're stronger than you know, Lily, and no matter what we find, I'm proud of you for coming this far." As they stepped off the plane and into the unknown, both Richard and Lily knew that this was the moment they had been waiting for. The moment where the past and present would collide, and where the truth, no matter how painful, would finally be revealed. The town of Clearwater was small, almost forgotten, nestled among rolling hills and dense forests. As Richard and Lily drove through its quiet streets, they both felt the weight of anticipation pressing down on them. The town had a stillness to it, the kind that made it feel like time had stood still, preserving memories and secrets alike. They checked into a modest inn, its faded sign swinging gently in the breeze. The innkeeper, a kind elderly woman with a knowing smile, welcomed them warmly, though her curious gaze lingered on Lily for a moment longer than usual. It was as if she sensed the importance of their visit, but she asked no questions, leaving them to their thoughts. Once they settled into their room, Lily paced nervously, her thoughts racing. What if she's not here? What if we're too late? She voiced her fears aloud, her hands trembling as she twisted them together. Richard watched her, his heart aching at the anxiety etched on her face. "We can't think like that," he said gently, walking over to her. "We've come this far, Lily. We have to believe that we'll find her." Lily nodded, though the doubt in her eyes remained. "I know. It's just, I've waited so long for this moment. I don't know what I'll do if it doesn't turn out the way I hope." Richard reached out, taking her hands in his. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together. You're not alone in this." His words seemed to bring her some comfort, and she took a deep breath, steadying herself. "You're right," she said, her voice stronger now. "I have to see this through." The next morning, armed with the address from the letter, they set out for the outskirts of town. The road wound through a dense forest, the trees tall and ancient, their branches forming a canopy overhead. The further they drove, the more isolated the landscape became, until they reached a small, weathered house at the end of a gravel road. Lily's heart pounded in her chest as they pulled up to the house. It was a modest place, its paint peeling and the garden overgrown, but there was something about it that felt familiar to her, as if she had seen it in a dream. She glanced at Richard, who gave her a reassuring nod, then turned her attention back to the house. "Are you ready?" Richard asked, his voice soft but steady. Lily swallowed hard, then nodded. "I think so," she whispered, though her voice trembled slightly. They got out of the car and walked up the short path to the front door. Lily's hand shook as she reached out to knock, but before she could, the door creaked open, revealing a woman who looked both familiar and yet like a stranger. The woman was older, her once dark hair streaked with gray, her face lined with years of worry and hardship. But her eyes, those deep, familiar eyes, were unmistakable. They were Lily's eyes. "Mom." Lily's voice was barely audible, her breath catching in her throat as she took in the sight of the woman she had been searching for all these years. The woman's eyes widened in shock, her hand flying to her mouth as tears welled up in her eyes. "Lily," she whispered, her voice breaking as she took a step forward, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. Lily nodded, her own tears spilling over. "It's me, Mom. It's really me." For a moment, there was only silence, the air thick with emotion as mother and daughter stood facing each other, years of separation and pain hanging between them. Then, with a sob, the woman, Evelyn, rushed forward, pulling Lily into a tight embrace, holding her as if she were afraid she might disappear. "My baby," Evelyn cried, her voice choked with emotion. "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Lily clung to her mother, her own tears falling freely now. "I missed you so much," she whispered, her voice trembling with the weight of all the years she had spent wondering, waiting, hoping for this moment. "I didn't understand why you left." Evelyn pulled back just enough to look into Lily's eyes, her own filled with guilt and regret. "I thought I was doing the right thing," she said, her voice heavy with sorrow. "I thought you'd be better off without me, that you'd have a better life if I wasn't around to mess it up." Lily shook her head, her heart breaking at the pain in her mother's voice. "But I needed you, Mom. I needed you so much." "I know," Evelyn whispered, her tears falling like rain. "And I'm so sorry that I wasn't there for you. But you have to believe me, Lily. I never stopped loving you. Not for a single moment." Richard watched from a few steps away, his own emotions swirling as he witnessed the reunion. He felt a deep sense of relief that Lily had found her mother, but also a sadness for all the years they had lost. He knew that the road to healing would be long, but this was the first step, a crucial step toward reconciliation and forgiveness. After a long moment, Evelyn finally noticed Richard standing nearby. Her eyes widened slightly in recognition, and she looked back at Lily, a question in her gaze. "This is Richard," Lily explained, her voice still shaky from the tears. "He's been helping me, helping us find you." Evelyn wiped her eyes, giving Richard a grateful nod. "Thank you," she said, her voice sincere. "Thank you for bringing my daughter back to me." Richard shook his head, a small smile on his lips. "It was Lily's strength that brought us here," he said gently. "I'm just glad I could be a part of it." Evelyn gestured toward the house, her expression a mixture of hope and uncertainty. "Would you both like to come inside? There's so much we need to talk about." Lily nodded, still holding onto her mother's hand as if afraid to let go. "Yes," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We have a lot to catch up on." As they stepped inside the small, cozy house, Richard couldn't help but feel a sense of hope. The walls were lined with photographs, many of them old and faded, but each one told a story that had been left unfinished for too long. They sat down in the living room, the atmosphere thick with emotion. Evelyn looked at Lily, her eyes full of love and regret. "I know I can't make up for all the years we lost," she began, her voice trembling, "but I want to try. I want to be a part of your life again, if you'll let me." Lily reached out, taking her mother's hand in hers. "I want that too, Mom," she said softly. "I want to get to know you, to understand what happened, and to move forward together." Evelyn's eyes filled with tears once more, but this time they were tears of hope. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for giving me another chance." As the evening wore on, they talked for hours, sharing stories and memories, filling in the gaps of all the years they had missed. Richard listened quietly, offering support when needed, but mostly just allowing mother and daughter the space they needed to reconnect. By the time the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light through the windows, there was a sense of peace in the room, a sense that, despite all the pain and heartache, they had found their way back to each other. As they prepared to leave, Evelyn walked them to the door, her hand still holding Lily's. "I know we have a long road ahead of us," she said softly, her voice filled with determination. "But I'm ready to walk it with you, Lily, whatever it takes." Lily smiled, her heart full for the first time in years. "Me too, Mom. Me too." Richard watched them, his heart swelling with pride for the journey Lily had taken. As they drove away from the small house in Clearwater, he knew that this was only the beginning. The past had left its scars, but now they were on the path to healing together. The days following their reunion with Evelyn were a whirlwind of emotions and revelations. Back in New York, Lily found herself grappling with the reality of having her mother back in her life. It was both exhilarating and overwhelming. Evelyn had come to stay at the hotel temporarily, at Richard's insistence, to allow mother and daughter the time and space they needed to reconnect. For the first time in years, Lily felt a sense of completeness she hadn't realized she'd been missing. But with that newfound joy came a flood of questions that had haunted her for so long and now demanded answers. One afternoon, as the city buzzed with life outside, Lily and Evelyn sat in the hotel's private lounge. The room was filled with the golden glow of the setting sun, casting long shadows across the floor. Richard had given them space, sensing that this conversation was one they needed to have alone. Lily fidgeted with the edge of her cup, the words she wanted to say swirling in her mind. Finally, she looked up at Evelyn, who was watching her with a mixture of anticipation and fear. "Mom," Lily began, her voice hesitant, "I need to understand. Why did you leave? Why didn't you ever come back for me?" Evelyn's eyes filled with sorrow, and she set down her own cup, folding her hands in her lap as she prepared to answer. "Lily, leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done," she said softly, her voice trembling. "But I was so lost, so broken. After what happened with Emma, I felt like I didn't deserve to be your mother. I thought you'd be better off without me." Lily's heart ached at the pain in her mother's voice. "But I needed you," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I needed you so much." Evelyn reached across the table, taking Lily's hands in hers. "I know," she said, tears glistening in her eyes. "And I was wrong. I thought I was protecting you, but all I did was hurt you. I can never make up for the years we lost, but I want to try. I want to be here for you now, in whatever way you'll let me." Lily looked at her mother, searching her face for the truth, and in Evelyn's eyes, she saw the regret, the love, and the desire to make things right. It wasn't perfect, and it didn't erase the past, but it was a start. "I want that too," Lily said, her voice steady despite the tears that threatened to spill over. "I want to know you, and I want you to know me, but it's going to take time. I need to learn to trust you again." Evelyn nodded, her expression earnest. "I understand," she said softly. "I'm not asking for forgiveness overnight. I just want the chance to show you that I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their words settling between them. It was a fragile peace, but it was real, and that was what mattered most. That evening, as the city's lights twinkled outside the window, Richard joined them for dinner. The atmosphere was lighter, the tension of earlier conversations giving way to a more relaxed mood. They talked about the small things, Lily's favorite songs, Evelyn's love of gardening, and Richard's memories of Emma. It was as if they were slowly weaving together the threads of their lives, creating something new and beautiful out of the pain that had once torn them apart. As the night wore on, Richard noticed the way Lily and Evelyn interacted. The shy smiles, the tentative questions, the way they seemed to mirror each other's movements without even realizing it. It was a bond that had been fractured but never completely broken, and he felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that he had played a part in bringing them back together. When dinner was over, Evelyn excused herself to retire for the night, leaving Richard and Lily alone in the lounge. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the soft hum of the city outside providing a soothing backdrop. "You did it," Richard said finally, breaking the silence. "You found her, and now you're starting to rebuild what was lost. I'm proud of you, Lily." Lily smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I couldn't have done it without you," she replied, her voice filled with gratitude. "You've been my anchor through all of this, Richard. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't need to repay me," Richard said, his tone gentle but firm. "Seeing you happy is enough. Besides, I think we've both gained something from this. You've brought something back into my life that I thought I'd lost forever, a sense of purpose, of hope." Lily's eyes softened, and she reached out to take his hand. "You've given me that too," she said quietly. "For the first time in so long, I feel like I have a future to look forward to." They sat there for a moment, the connection between them deepening as they held each other's gaze. It was a quiet understanding, a mutual recognition of the journey they had taken together and the bond that had formed between them. "I think it's time I started thinking about what's next," Lily said after a while, her voice thoughtful. "I've spent so much of my life looking back, searching for answers, that I haven't really thought about what I want for the future." Richard nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "What do you want, Lily?" he asked, his voice encouraging. Lily took a deep breath, as if considering the question for the first time. "I want to pursue my music again," she said slowly, the realization settling over her like a warm blanket. "But this time, I want to do it on my own terms. No more running, no more hiding. I want to create something that's true to who I am, something that honors the journey I've been on." Richard smiled, a sense of pride swelling within him. "I think that's a beautiful idea," he said. "And whatever you decide, I'll be here to support you." Lily looked at him, her heart full of gratitude and something else, something deeper that she wasn't quite ready to name. "Thank you, Richard," she said softly, "for everything." As they sat together, the city lights casting a warm glow over the room, they both knew that this was only the beginning. The path to healing was long, and there would be challenges ahead, but they were ready to face them together. For the first time in years, Lily felt at peace with her past and excited for the future. And as she looked at Richard, she knew that whatever came next, she wouldn't have to face it alone. The morning sun streamed through the curtains of the hotel suite, casting a warm, golden light over the room. Lily sat by the window, her guitar in her lap, gently strumming a melody that had been playing in her mind since the night before. The notes were soft and tentative, but they carried a sense of hope, a reflection of the changes in her life. Richard watched her from across the room, a cup of coffee in his hand. He had become accustomed to these quiet moments where Lily would lose herself in her music, and he found them to be some of the most peaceful and fulfilling times of his day. There was something about the way she played, the way her fingers moved across the strings with such grace and emotion, that captivated him. Lily glanced up and caught Richard's eye, a small smile playing on her lips. "I've been working on a new song," she said, her voice soft. "I think it's almost ready." Richard returned her smile, setting down his coffee as he walked over to her. "I'd love to hear it," he said, his tone warm and encouraging. Lily hesitated for a moment, then nodded, taking a deep breath as she prepared to share what she had been working on. She closed her eyes, letting the music flow through her, and began to play. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, a mix of sorrow and hope, and as she sang, her voice carried the weight of all the emotions she had experienced over the past few months. The lyrics spoke of loss and longing, of finding strength in the midst of pain, and of the journey toward healing. It was a song that told her story, a story of searching for answers and finding them in the most unexpected places. When she finished, the last note lingering in the air, Lily opened her eyes to find Richard watching her with a look of deep admiration. "That was incredible," he said, his voice filled with emotion. "It's the most beautiful song I've ever heard." Lily blushed, her heart swelling with pride and gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. "It's still a work in progress, but it feels like the right direction." Richard sat down beside her, his gaze never leaving hers. "You have a gift, Lily," he said earnestly, "and the world needs to hear it. I know you've been through so much, but your music, it has the power to touch people, to heal them, just like it's healed you." Lily looked down at her guitar, running her fingers lightly over the strings. "I want to share it," she said quietly, "but it's scary, putting myself out there again. What if I fail? What if it's not enough?" Richard reached out, gently lifting her chin so she would meet his gaze. "You won't fail," he said firmly, "and you don't have to do it alone. I'll be right here, supporting you every step of the way." Lily's eyes filled with tears, but this time, they were tears of gratitude and hope. "You've done so much for me, Richard," she said, her voice trembling. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You already have," Richard replied softly, "just by being here, by finding your way back to yourself. That's all the thanks I need." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their connection hanging between them. It was a bond that had been forged through shared pain and the search for healing, and now it was stronger than ever. Finally, Lily broke the silence. "I want to do something to celebrate," she said, her eyes shining with excitement. "Something to mark this new beginning." Richard raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you have in mind?" Lily's smile widened, a glimmer of mischief in her eyes. "I want to perform," she said, the words spilling out in a rush. "Not just for you, but for others. I want to hold a small concert, something intimate, where I can share my music with people who need to hear it." Richard's smile matched hers. "I think that's a wonderful idea," he said, his heart swelling with pride. "And I know just the place." A few weeks later, the hotel's rooftop terrace was transformed into an intimate concert venue. Twinkling lights were strung overhead, casting a soft glow over the space. The city skyline provided a breathtaking backdrop, and the warm summer breeze carried the scent of flowers from the nearby garden. Lily stood backstage, her heart pounding with a mix of nerves and excitement. She hadn't performed in front of an audience in years, and the thought of sharing her most personal music with strangers was both exhilarating and terrifying. But she knew this was something she had to do, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever felt lost, who had ever needed to find their way back. Richard appeared at her side, his presence immediately calming her nerves. He reached out, taking her hand in his. "You're going to be amazing," he said, his voice filled with confidence. "Just be yourself, and let the music do the rest." Lily squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his support. "Thank you," she whispered, her heart full of gratitude. "For everything." Richard leaned in, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "You've got this, Lily," he said, his voice soft. "Now go out there and show them who you are." With one last deep breath, Lily stepped onto the stage. The audience, a small group of friends, hotel guests, and music lovers, fell silent as she approached the microphone. The terrace was bathed in a soft, golden light, and the city skyline twinkled behind her like a sea of stars. Lily took a moment to take it all in, the nerves giving way to a sense of peace and purpose. She glanced at Richard, who was standing off to the side, his eyes filled with pride and encouragement. Then she turned back to the audience, her heart steady. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her voice clear and confident. "This music, it's my story. It's about loss and love, about finding your way through the darkness and into the light. And I hope it resonates with each of you, in whatever way you need it to." With that, she began to play. The first notes of her guitar filled the air, rich and melodic, and as she sang, the words flowed from her heart. It was a song of hope, of resilience, of the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. And as she played, the audience was captivated, drawn into the emotion and beauty of her music. Lily lost herself in the performance, feeling every word, every note, as if it were a part of her soul. She sang of the pain she had endured, of the journey she had taken, and of the new beginning she had found. And with each song, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders, the past falling away as she embraced the future. When the final note faded into the night, there was a moment of silence, an almost reverent pause, before the audience erupted into applause. Lily stood there, overwhelmed by the response, tears streaming down her face as she realized that she had done it. She had shared her story, her music, and it had touched people in a way she hadn't thought possible. Richard was the first to reach her, pulling her into a tight embrace as the applause continued. "You were incredible," he whispered in her ear, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you." Lily clung to him, her heart overflowing with gratitude and love. "I couldn't have done it without you," she whispered back, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you for believing in me." As they stood there, surrounded by the warmth of the evening and the love of those around them, Lily knew that this was just the beginning. The path ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to face it. With Richard by her side, she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she would have the strength to overcome them. And as she looked out at the city, the lights twinkling like stars in the night, she felt a deep sense of peace and fulfillment. This was her new beginning, a chapter filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities, and she couldn't wait to see where it would take her. The days that followed Lily's rooftop concert were filled with a renewed sense of purpose and joy. The experience had been cathartic, not only for her, but for everyone who had been there. Word of her performance began to spread, and soon, she found herself receiving invitations to perform at small venues around the city, intimate spaces where her music could resonate with those who needed it most. But amid the excitement of this new chapter, Lily remained grounded, constantly reflecting on how far she had come and the people who had helped her along the way. She knew that this journey was not one she had taken alone, and for that, she was deeply grateful. One evening, as summer began to give way to the crispness of fall, Lily found herself back on the hotel's rooftop terrace. The city stretched out before her, bathed in the warm, golden light of the setting sun. She had always loved this time of day. the magic hour when everything seemed to glow with a quiet, serene beauty. Richard joined her a few moments later, his presence a comforting constant in her life. He handed her a cup of tea, and they stood together, watching as the sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting long shadows across the city. "You've been quiet today," Richard observed, his voice gentle. "What's on your mind?" Lily took a sip of her tea, letting the warmth seep into her. "I've just been thinking," she said softly, "about everything that's happened and how much my life has changed. It's almost overwhelming when I think about where I was just a few months ago." Richard nodded, understanding the depth of her reflection. "You've come so far, Lily. You've faced your past, found your mother, and now you're sharing your music with the world. That's something to be proud of." Lily smiled a small, contented smile. "I am proud," she admitted. "But it's more than that. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. And it's not just because of the music or finding my mother. It's because of you." Richard looked at her, his expression softening. "Lily, you've done all of this on your own. I've just been here to support you." "That's not true," Lily said, turning to face him fully. "You've been my anchor, Richard. You believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. You helped me find my way when I was lost. I wouldn't be standing here today if it weren't for you." Richard reached out, gently cupping her face in his hands. "Lily, you've always had the strength within you. I just helped you see it." Tears welled up in Lily's eyes, but they were tears of gratitude and love. "I'm so grateful for you," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "You've given me so much. Hope, love, a second chance at life. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't need to repay me," Richard replied softly. "Having you in my life is all the thanks I need. You've brought light back into my world, Lily. You've given me something I thought I'd lost forever." Lily's heart swelled with emotion, and in that moment, she knew that this was the truth she had been searching for all along. It wasn't just about finding her mother or pursuing her music. It was about the love she had found, unexpected and beautiful, with the man who had stood by her side through it all. Without another word, Lily leaned in, her lips meeting Richard's in a soft, tender kiss. It was a kiss filled with all the unspoken words, the emotions that had built between them over the months. It was a promise of a future filled with love, hope, and the strength to face whatever came their way. When they finally pulled apart, Richard rested his forehead against hers, his breath mingling with hers in the cool evening air. "I love you, Lily," he whispered, the words filled with all the depth of his feelings. "I think I've loved you from the moment I saw you standing in the rain outside the hotel." Lily smiled, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. "I love you too, Richard," she whispered back. "I've been so afraid of losing you, of losing what we've found together. But now I know that as long as we're together, we can face anything." Richard kissed her again, a slow, lingering kiss that spoke of all the things they had been through and all the things they had yet to experience. When they finally parted, he took her hand, leading her to the edge of the terrace where they could see the city spread out before them, the lights beginning to twinkle as night fell. "This is just the beginning," Richard said, his voice filled with quiet determination. "We have so much ahead of us, Lily, and I want to experience it all with you." Lily squeezed his hand, feeling the truth of his words resonate deep within her. "I do too," she said, her voice filled with certainty. "I'm ready for whatever comes next, as long as we're together." They stood there for a long time, watching as the city came alive with the night. The world stretched out before them, filled with endless possibilities, and for the first time, Lily felt truly at peace. She had found her mother, pursued her music, and now she had found love, a love that was deep and true, born out of pain and healing. It wasn't the life she had imagined for herself, but it was more beautiful than anything she could have dreamed. As the stars began to dot the sky, Richard wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. Together, they looked out at the world that awaited them, their hearts full of hope and the promise of a future they would build together. In that moment, Lily knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them side by side, their love guiding them through the darkness and into the light. And as they stood there, wrapped in each other's embrace. She felt a deep, abiding certainty that this was just the beginning of a beautiful, extraordinary journey, a journey that would carry them forward, together, into the future.